Hi, everyone. I am Joy Kennedy. I'm the Alliance for Climate Change and Environment Chair. Part of our mission is to put on events like this career panel. Which, really excited to have 4 great panelists today. Luisa Portugal is going to moderate the event as well. She's one of the event chairs for ACE. And I just want to give a shout out to Matt Minner, may or may not, but he is the other chair for ACE, and he did a lot of planning for this event, secured all of our panels. I will, and we like doing a little Q&A with them with questions that we've prepared already for about like 30 to breakout rooms where you can choose one of the panelists to have a little bit of an intimate conversation with and ask more questions. So Luisa, do you want to introduce our panelists?
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone coming here, and thank you for our panelists. I'm going to do a brief introduction for each of them. Please correct me if I'm wrong. But we have here Joanna Lovecchio. She is an associate director at the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes. She specializes in urban climate adaptation, planning, and public infrastructure project design that is forward-looking and conscious of community-based and ecosystem resilience. Joanna has also served as a senior analyst and program manager at HR&A Advisors, as well as a city planner at the New York City Department of City Planning. We also have here with us Ryan Pakowski. He's a recent graduate of urban planning. His specialization is in environmental and transportation planning, and he previously interned at the New York City Economic Development Corporation, rotating between their land use and ports and transportation teams. His current position involves assessing the opportunity cost of free on-street parking in New York City, and he's in partnership with the New York City-based think tank Transportation Alternatives. We also have with us Daniel Francis, a manager on the Global Sustainability Finance team at Morgan Stanley. Prior to his current role, Daniel spent more than 6 years on Environmental Defense Fund's climate program in Washington, D.C. and New York. While at EDF, he managed the organization's presence at the international climate negotiations and led contributions to the Americans Pledge report. Finally, we also have here Rose Martinez, a senior data scientist at New York City Council, leading projects that use a data-driven approach to impact the New York City Council legislative and policy-making process. As part of the data team, Rose sources data sets, analyzes data, builds models, and creates maps and dashboards to assist council staff and council members to use data to make decisions. Rose previously worked at Cypress Hill LDC as part of the Morgan Stanley Community Development Graduate Fellowship, and she also worked on the Brownfield Opportunity Areas Program evaluations as her capstone project with new partners for community revitalization as clients. So we have a great mix of panelists. They have very different areas and specializations, but also focusing on environmental sustainability. And I would love if all of you could please tell us who you are a little more, more than I could get with the introductions. And maybe you could also walk us through briefly how you got to your current role, or what were the things that you think helped you get there. I can ask someone to start. Joanna, I started the introductions with you, so sure. If I may ask you to start the discussion.
Sure, I'm happy to. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to reconnect with the Wagner community, and nice to see all your faces. Thanks everyone for who was on video. It's nice to talk to people. I'm Joanna Lovecchio. I am, right now my job is the Associate Director at the Center for Resilient Cities and Landscapes at Columbia University. It is a small applied research center. A little bit about my path there, I guess we'll give some context. I am a graduate of the Masters of Urban Planning program at Wagner. I graduated in 2014. I also went to NYU as an undergrad. I studied environmental studies and metropolitan studies, and was always very interested in this kind of intersection between human and the human psyche and the environment as things that are sort of inextricably linked together and are very deeply expressed in the way that we build cities, the way that we behave in cities, the way cities are designed, the way we are sort of filtered through them, the way we are separated within them, sort of underpin a lot of what was interesting to me in school and very much shaped my path. My first job was actually at the Department of City Planning as a city planner. I did that full-time and went to Wagner part-time. So I think someone just said Rose was working on the Brownfield Opportunity Area Program Evaluation. That was my first job, was working on that program a long time ago, doing community research or community planning research at the planning department. And during that time, Hurricane Sandy happened in New York City. So it was a really, really intense moment for the city of New York. If you were here at that time, $19 billion worth of damages. We had 3 days of a blackout. Several people died. And it really fundamentally shaped my career from then on. At the city planning department, it was very much pencils down on everything you're working on and reframe, because it became a very clear reality that climate risk was a very real and existential threat to the city of New York and how we plan, but also a really deep exposure around vulnerability, social vulnerability and ecological vulnerability in New York City that stayed with me throughout my career. I went on to consulting at HRNA in between my job and that city planning job. And now my job is really as an applied researcher. My job is to really work with climate scientists, urban designers, and others to really translate the latest available climate science to support community-based and local planning projects and community-based projects. So really sort of making that connection between climate science and urban design and planning decisions in very local ways. I work around the world until recently with COVID. A lot of my work has been grounded and much more focused on New York City. So working on some really interesting projects, which I'm happy to share a little bit more about, but that's a little bit of my path.
Thank you, Joanna. That was great, very insightful. If I can continue calling out the panelists if no one is going forward. Ryan, you are the next one that I'm seeing here on my right. So can you please take the floor? Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation and putting this together. This is really exciting. I actually might speak a little bit to Joanna's point and build off of that, since I came into the New York City Economic Development Corporation, which is an adjunct support mechanism to the city, and like post Hurricane Sandy. And I got to see sort of the play out of how that might impact the biorhythm of the city and how that also plays out to the landscaping of the city. Which was very challenging since there's very few mechanisms to fund those projects which are essential at the local level. So I've come up with a few funding strategies with that. So I'm a recent graduate, I mentioned, in 2020, I almost forgot, it's a while ago. It feels a while ago at least. I hit hard as an international student, was with the New York City Economic Development Corporation, but because of budget cuts, currently unemployed, but I'm employed in another mechanism. So, but I can definitely speak to my time there and sort of my interest. So at least my interest is, Joanna was speaking to something really fascinating, which is kind of the intersection of components. Urban planning, I think, is a really neat aspect where there's a lot of intersectionality. My interest is more from the biochemical side of things. I went to undergrad initially for biochemistry, and I loved biochemistry in high school. So I'm always curious and kind of like revisiting how important the biochemistry and interaction of land uses is important. And what I mean by that is, I think one of the things I've learned when I was at the Economic Development Corporation is that urban planners can kind of say as much as we want to say, but we're preaching to the choir, which is largely urban planners, and we're aware of that. The hardest part is committing and like convincing a number of individuals who are in the day-to-day community level that this is like a worthwhile initiative. And it's quite challenging to do so without proper funding. So it was interesting to see how FEMA funding was very competitive to get and actually apply to build out the number of projects. So what I mean to say is, I think, which is an interesting and possibly the most useful component to students is not my career path, but more sort of like what are the tangible skills I learned, which is really important negotiating skills. I would highly recommend negotiating, probably more important than technical skills. I recently learned that the technical skills are great for getting a job, but to actually execute your job in success are the negotiation skills, by far the most useful, and your personability, and be able to just at least speak the language, not as a technician or as like an urban planner, but speak sort of to the people that you're trying to work with and partner with, and also the politicians that you need to partner with. Since they're the essential like sort of gatekeepers, if you will, to get a project forward, you already are, as an urban planner, generally are convinced that this is a useful and helpful project. So that's kind of what I would say are the most useful things. I would strongly recommend like courses at NYU that, or courses, but also just like beyond NYU, any opportunity to sort of replug into this community event, which has been supported through NYU, but also any sort of continuing education that you have, the opportunity to boost your communication skills is really important and essential to getting your project done. So that's kind of what I would say. I'll leave myself a little mysterious. I'm happy to kind of go in depth, but I want to make this as applicable for and relevant for our students who are joining. So thank you.
Oh, that was great insight. And I think that you mentioned that you graduated last year, and many of us, including myself here that's graduating this year, we are still looking at the kind of hellscape of a job market. So it's very good to hear your insights. Daniel, can you talk about your experience later as well?
Absolutely, and thank you all again for organizing. When I was at Wagner, my friend Ileana Paul, who I think is now at the NYU Institute for Policy Integrity, ran ACE. And when I was in my, I guess, second to last semester, she handed ACE over, or tried to hand ACE over to me, but work was so demanding that I couldn't take it. So I'm glad to see this group still going strong. I wanted to also thank Matt and Absentia and then Joya and Luisa for organizing. As some of the other panelists have said, it's really nice to connect with Wagner. I know it's been a while since we've all been able to get together for a happy hour, but just a little bit about myself, because I think it explains some of what Joanna and Ryan were saying. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, which is, I think, one of the cities in the US that's most impacted by the urban heat island effect. So that was something personally that I was really interested in. I've always been interested in kind of the intersection of cities and climate, which was a big reason why coming out of undergrad in Xavier in Cincinnati, for those of you that are basketball fans, probably the only reason why you'd know it, that I decided to kind of go to DC and see what the policy and politics world was like. And I knew then that I wanted to go to urban planning, but wanted to make sure and take some extra time and get some extra experience before really committing to that. So I worked full-time at EDF, as Luisa mentioned, for a number of years on international climate policy. I was fortunate enough to be in Paris when the Paris Agreement was signed, and to go to a couple of the other international climate negotiations after. So feel very fortunate, and that you're able to get to see how the sausage is made. I then moved up to New York for an opportunity here at EDF, and then continued part-time at night. I know Joy was saying she was a full-time worker and part-time student, as was Joanna. So I can sympathize with those long nights, and know how long and arduous that process can take. But I made the switch over to Morgan Stanley back in January 2019. I had a colleague who was a lawyer at EDF who always encouraged me to look at things from the other side of the table. And up to that point in my career, I was exclusively nonprofit focused and wanted to see what the other side was like, and saw an opportunity to do some really interesting work in helping Morgan Stanley kind of build out its net zero commitment, build out how the bank addresses climate change, both with its clients and internally with employees. So made that shift a little over 2 years ago. I'll pause there.
Thank you. I'm very curious to hear more about you talking your experience with the Paris Accord. I think this is a really interesting time in history. But Rose, can you close out this round of questions with a little bit about your experience?
Yeah, so hi, my name is Rose Martinez. I graduated in 2016. So I got interested, well, right now I'm a senior data scientist at the New York City Council. For those of you who don't know what the New York City Council is, it's the legislative body for New York City. So there's 51 council members, and they're elected. And I'm within the legislative division. And I work with lawyers, and they're the ones who are drafting the bills for New York City. And there are times where they're drafting some legislation that requires for agencies to report back on how they're like delivering services or anything similar like that. And we provide support in that way, like how to ask for the data, what questions. So I got to this position. So similar to Joanna, I was at NYU for an undergrad in the Metropolitan Studies major. And then I straight from there, went to Wagner for urban planning. I took WebGIS with Chris Wong. I don't know if he's still teaching that here. And that's where I learned coding, HTML, how to make interactive maps and stuff like that. I really enjoyed it. And then from there, I had the Morgan and Stanley Fellowship at Cypress Hills. And at the same time, I was doing the capstone on BOA. And there was a lot of data and data sets, and Pluto is a massive data set. That's sort of the data set that urban planners are very familiar with. And that sort of like helped me significantly where I am now, and sort of to branch out from there. So then it was interesting because when I was at Cypress Hills, I was helping, it was happening during the East New York rezoning. So I helped them testify against the city council's plan for rezoning. And then there's this job posting for a junior quantitative analyst at the city council. So I switched sides in a way from there. And it was really interesting because they really wanted someone to help do the maps. So I had the technical skills, but I was interested in urban planning in cities and what more than you get that at the city council with all this legislation. And it's not just focused on one topic. It's like transportation, education, veteran services, it's everything, including environmental issues. I don't know, I guess I can stop there for now. Open to questions later on.
Awesome. Thank you, Rose. So our question is all about like what skills you think graduate students should hone while in school, hopefully. And Ryan, I know you talked a little bit about like the soft skills, negotiation skills. So I thought maybe we'd start with you again, just see what other skills you think are good to hone during like your graduate education.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Joya. I'll keep it short and simple. I'm mostly drawing on the variety of mentors that I have both in the US and also in Canada. I am Canadian from Toronto and Montreal. So I've heard from planners from the UK side, the Canadian side and American side, slightly different, and also from Singapore as well. So I have slightly different sort of approaches based on your country that you're working in. But generally I've heard a resounding sort of like similarity, which is everything that you learn will be useful in one point in time later in your life. So don't ever sell yourself short. an example, case in point, is my background. I love biochemistry, but I ended up going to school for politics and economics, and then I ended up going to get a finance job for 4 years. That was related roughly to like underwriting, which is pricing people based on their health status. And insurance is a very demonic, depressing world, but it's fascinating at the same time. And maybe even more pro public health than ever before. Point is, my finance skills became really useful in being able to do like financial statements when I was working on those, and also work really comfortably with large data sets and numbers. And that was useful because I ended up doing then appraisal of EDC's real estate sort of its property that it manages for the city in Coney Island, when they was doing an assessment for what rents it should charge to tenants for commercial services, et cetera. So when I was there, I was able to do like a bridge stretch goal and say, hey, like I have these financial skills, and I was onboarded, even though I wasn't working with the financial team. They said, here, great, let's work on this. And then I used that to work on the ports and transportation team, where they were trying to price and do a cost benefit analysis of some of the projects. And I had that skill in-house. And they were able to lean on me for that. So just like, don't sell yourself short. You will go in a very weird way in your career, and you won't reach your goal maybe directly. If you do, even better. I wish you all the best. I haven't, and I found that I had to be kind of very careful and strategic and playing on my skills, but you will definitely use your skills in the future. As I think the panelists have made it very clear that that's true. Very quickly. So I think the first thing is that be comfortable doing stretch goals for yourself. Second point is our mentor recommended I sing the scales. That being said, be comfortable speaking like to the high level. Never, even though where a lot of us will go very detailed in some like specific things, like coding is a great skill to have. A lot of schools actually don't teach that, to my surprise, which is pretty essential. But that's helpful to know. But I think it's really important to kind of always be able to sort of play it back to those who aren't coders, like why that's relevant. Like pitch the high level in like a one statement case for why coding, or maybe what you learned while you were coding was useful. Because a lot of people honestly are quite siloed in their professions. Quickly, I learned EDC when I was working on projects. My passion, of course, was transportation planning, but most of the company couldn't care about their sort of innovative research that I was working on for EV technology, like electric vehicle technology. For the city, for its like department sanitation trucks, for its taxis, which are now EV. So I was kind of working on that, which was kind of cool. But most people in my company or the organization didn't really care. And so you had to really make kind of like one pitch elevator statement in 2 sentences and like why it matters to them and to a lawyer who may be focused on maybe like property law. Why should they care? Well, it matters to them because it actually may get more individuals to buy the property, because then maybe they have also like a EV charger at the property, so that makes the property more appreciative and more valuable. So kind of being able to sort of sing the high level, but also relate it back to why your passion and your small skills. So know your skills, but be able to communicate effectively is key always, because often people won't be interested in the things that you're interested in, which is unfortunate, but that's life. And the third thing really quickly I would say is be very comfortable in setting stretch goals for yourself, meaning if you don't think you know a skill 100%, that's okay. Most of the time, you will probably know maybe a skill maybe 50% of the time. Like, oh yeah, I did some programming, not perfect on it, but you're probably actually a lot better than most people you're working with. So kind of set it as like a stretch for yourself, and maybe like talk to your manager. It's like, hey, I'm actually kind of comfortable in this. Do you have a project, or do you have like a team that I could support for this goal? If you have a good manager, and hopefully you do, often they'll support you in that, which I found is my surprise. And you'll learn that. So you learn on the job is boosting those skills you learn or that are central at NYU. So I was pretty surprised at how much just you need to know the basics, and then you can move on pretty quickly after that, as long as you have a supportive manager. That's the key thing. Always go for supportive managers, even if it's the cost of a lower salary. Very important. You'll learn a lot faster. So I'm going to close with that, but these are just like life skills, I would say, from what my mentors have told me.
Thanks, and if it's all right, I'll go ahead and jump in, just because, Ryan, I think what you said there is similar to what I wanted to touch on too. Is like, while you're at Wagner, find something that makes you uncomfortable. And I say this as someone who I wish I had done more what Rose did on the data side, like exploring those muscles that, quite frankly, I'm still not very strong at. I've always been a qualitative guy. guy, not a quant guy. So, you know, what Ryan said, stretch yourselves. The point of this education is to learn more about things that you wouldn't otherwise. And then obviously project and time management critical, especially as you start in to get to like 9-5, 9-6, or however long your hours are. The one thing that I feel like is kind of a grind that everybody experiences at Wagner that you know, we kind of grit our teeth through is capstone. Maybe some of you are doing that right now, but the flexibility and teamwork that you have an opportunity to exercise there is something that I actually have returned to. You know, not everybody in those groups are always going to get along, and at some point in your career, you're going to encounter somebody that you just don't get along with, and that's, it doesn't have to be the end of the world, but it's something that you can work on, or at least know how to manage. And I know I certainly had that at moments during my own capstone process as well. So if you're going through that now, just know there's light at the end of the tunnel, but at some point in your career, like it'll manifest in a different way. You know, you'll have a tiff with a coworker, but hopefully you can work through that through some of those MPSO skills that, believe it or not, I have found myself returning to. Like, I don't know if any of you all have, what was it? Did anybody do the Everest exercise? Anyway, I've thought about that more times than I care to admit. You know, since I graduated in 2018, which I did not mention in my introduction, but I'll go ahead and stop there and turn it over to some of the other panelists.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel. Rose
Yeah.
or Joanna? Yeah,
Yeah, I can add, I second everything that Daniel and Ryan has said. For technical skills, when I applied to my job, it was a technical skill that they were mostly interested in. But the thing that sort of sold me was that they're willing to teach me R, which is a programming language. So there was an opportunity to learn while providing what I already knew I can do in GIS and ArcGIS. And then from there, it helped me grow. So don't be afraid if you don't meet all the requirements on a job position, or they say that you have to be willing to learn. Similar to Ryan, like stretch goals. That was a stretch goal there for me to learn more coding. So from there, I was able, now I code all the time. I don't use Excel as often, but my starting point was Excel. So there's nothing wrong in doing your analysis in Excel. Excel is great too, but it really helped me from there to go from Excel to R. And then also project management, working with a team is extremely important, because after you have the technical skills and you can prove that you can deliver a certain thing, working with others is what's going to help you shine and possibly like grow, and like meeting new people, connecting, building relationships, coming up with new projects for your team. That all requires you working with others and communicating. So communication is also very, very important. I recommend practicing that, communicating both orally and written if you're going to do reports and stuff. Also communicating in a way like the scales, first technical, and also for someone who has no knowledge or technical experience, for them to also to understand what you're trying to convey. I guess those are the two, both technical and communication, and working with a team is extremely important. My capstone project, my teammates were amazing. I was very lucky. It was a great experience. I learned so much from that too, like Daniel said. And I hope you guys are also, even if your teammates are not amazing, you'll still learn a lot from the experience.
And there's also benefit in learning what you don't want to do as well, right? And I know for capstone, you know, it was a little bit more in the weeds on transportation than I anticipated, but I still learned a ton and got to see different parts of the community. And just to tack on to what Rose said, and I'm sorry to cut you off, Joanna, when you're applying for jobs, let the hiring people decide whether or not you're qualified. Don't rule yourself out. Like, always apply for the job. And I say this, and I realize I'm an imperfect messenger, but like in the conversations I've had with the women in my life, the number of men who apply for jobs that they don't think they're qualified for, and the number of jobs that women don't think they're qualified for and don't end up applying, just apply. Let them tell you no. I can't tell you how many times I've had to like convince friends to do that, but just do it. Apply.
Yes. Totally agree with everything everyone has said. And just to build off of that, I keep hearing like, don't be fearful if you don't have the technical skills 100%. That also goes for knowledge and point of view. I was always very comfortable in a classroom. I love school, was ever since I was a kid, is always very comfortable in a classroom. Really changed when I started working and found myself in a very male-dominated consulting firm in a conference room with shiny glass doors. And it's a very different experience. And I think that this is an experience that a lot of women have in the workplace. And I once had a mentor tell me, she called me out on it, and because she could tell that I had something to say in a conference room and I was holding back. And she said, I want to know what you have to say. And we're going to work on not knowing the answer 2000% before you offer what your thoughts are, which is something I'm still working on to this day, but very much aware of it. Some other things, your capstone team. I love hearing about the capstone. I haven't thought about that in a while, but the Wagner community is a tight one, which you will draw on a lot in your career. A lot of them are still colleagues in places that I work in networks that I'm in. So expect to have that. So cultivate that while you're in school. Some of the other things that come to mind when I think about skills or things that I draw on a lot are less technical. But I think a lot of my job is researching and synthesizing lots and lots of information from lots of places and boiling it down to different audiences. And I like to think about this in two ways. I love this notion of singing the scales to different audiences in the way that you think about how you communicate it out. I also think a lot about research as method, because a lot of times, as siloed as we are, we also have siloed ways of thinking about research. So I think it's increasingly important, it always has been important, but increasingly so, that we are very, very critical as researchers and thinkers and workers, especially in climate and environment, where justice and social justice is really at the root of a lot of the issues that we talk about, think about, plan around. So getting very curious, very open, and very deep in the way that you think about the underlying causes of the issues that you're interested in, and very wide in the lens that you take, is a super important thing, I would say. I also think this is a softer skill, but empathy and listening is also a huge skill that you have to cultivate just to be a person in the world, in the complex social environment that we live in, arriving at situations with understanding of your privilege and the opportunities that have been afforded to you, of the difference of perspective that you have, and curiosity, open-mindedness, and empathy to the experience that others may not share. I think a lot of times, something I'm learning and really thinking a lot about in my current job is the way in which planners and policymakers very often value technical information above that of lived experience. So in my job right now, we are really making an effort to sort of raise those two things onto a similar scale of hierarchy. So I think being very, very mindful of the way that that shows up in your job is super important. I also think I guess I'll end on this, that you know, I find myself a lot of times, you know, I'm working on two very different projects right now. One of them is working with a group of high school students who are trying to shut down their street on 182nd Street in Washington Heights outside of their school, make it into a clean air green corridor that connects the parks. It's a fabulous project with a fabulous group of students, which I have the privilege of working with them and learning from them. I'm also working with a group of coral reef managers in Australia, trying to think about coral reef restoration and engagement with traditional owners who have been on the land for 30,000 years in Australia. And I think these are two extremely divergent issues, divergent communities, totally different places on completely opposite sides of the world. And yet there are underlying causes, that undercurrent of injustice and environmental damage that we've done that really underpin and are similar in both places. So I think having a mind towards difference as well as similarity, despite cultures, environments, risks, geographies, is a super important skill to be able to kind of integrate and synthesize across all the stuff that you're going to learn in your career.
Those are all great questions. I'm actually going to refer back to the ACE leader, Joy, in the interest of time. I don't know if she wants me to ask a closing question or if we should move to the breakout room section.
Yeah, I think maybe breakout rooms. I think our last question is if any of you had any like dying piece of advice you wanted to share with the group before we go into breakouts. But
yeah, so if any of you have either something that a piece of wisdom that you really want to share, or if you have any events, job opportunities, or internships that you want to plug for the whole room, for the whole group, please let us know. Otherwise, we're going to move for the breakout section.
I'll just say something really, oh, go ahead, Ryan. Oh, okay, I'll go ahead and go. So I guess the one piece of advice, so there was, well, let me start before we all go. I can't imagine having to do what you guys have done the past year learning remotely. So first of all, give yourself a lot of credit there. You may not realize it, but you are learning skills that you will have a leg up on people like me who have just been doing this in a work environment. But at the same time, like make sure, and I know I can't speak for the other panelists, but I've struggled to set boundaries this past year as we've become more digital, workdays become more fluid. I really struggled with that at Wagner when I was working full time. I just felt like I was constantly on. So make sure that, whenever we return to the new normal or whatever that ever looks like or whatever that is, you are clear with your boundaries. I think you'll be a better professional and a better citizen as a result. And then the one thing I did want to mention was I came across this New Yorker cartoon this past week that said something along the lines of like, I can't wait to forget everything I learned about myself during quarantine. Think about what resonated for you the past year. Maybe that's climate change, maybe it's women's rights, maybe it's voting rights, maybe it's addressing systemic racism, you name it. We have dealt with so many crises, be they healthcare or democracy, that are worthy of your time. So if new interests have come to the surface in this past year, explore them and give them the time that they're worth.
I would second that. And I would also say that there is intersection amongst all of them. So stay true to your mission and your value system, less committed to the job title that you're after, more committed to your mission and value system, because that will never serve you wrong. And I also think, there are so many demands and need for talent and people who care about tackling these enormous issues that are overwhelming at times. And I think something that I struggle with, but also return to all the time in this space is, the demand and the urgency and the scale of an issue like climate change is so big. And yet the tools that we have are those of incremental. So I think sort of keeping in view that every step matters and we all have our corners to take care of when things get a bit overwhelming, which they do and have certainly in the last year plus, is also really important to kind of stay focused and not get burnt out or disillusioned, because it's worth it.
Really quickly, I'll just add to Daniel's point, also what's been like echoed through Rose and also Joanna, is don't be afraid to go to other schools, like other schools within like the NYU bracket. I went to the Tandon School of Engineering, terrified because I'm not an engineering background. My math skills are okay, super helpful. It was very hard, but I learned a lot that ended up being very useful down the road. I also went to the Gallatin School of Urban Design, and I learned some, and I worked with some architecture students, and that was incredibly helpful because I started to speak. I became, as I think Rose and also sort of like Joanna were saying, like become multilingual in sort of your skill set so that you can speak to the different sort of professions and industries. Incredibly helpful. And I would second Joanna's point, active listening is incredibly important. I wish we learned that actually in school, and that was a course in itself, as I've learned that I like to shut up more as I get older and just listen. And generally the person will tell me everything that I need to hear if I'm actually actively listening and just remain quiet. So that's the two things I would second. Thanks, guys.
I guess I can just
So, oh yeah, go ahead, Rose, sorry.
we can break out. It's fine. I was just gonna say, don't expect that since you have completed your master's, you're not gonna learn anymore, or you've reached your ultimate learning. You're not. You're gonna learn so much more from here, and just be curious and interested in anything that you decide to go into.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. I'm going to first off stop the recording.